Thank you, Alex, and the Tenseg team. Welcome. You are in the right spot. If you are ready for the plenary session of this year's REA Becoming Good Ancestors Conference, I am the last program chair elected president. We've made some changes and we've been through a pandemic together. So I'm really grateful that we get to do this in community, do this virtual conference thing one last time, because next year we will be back in person. But I just want to say welcome to new members and old members, to good ancestors, and to the rest of you, welcome as well. To board members, future board members, and leadership. For those in time zones that this is the morning, for those who it's late at night or the middle of the day, thank you for signing on. Welcome to all those who are coming to this for the first time. We hope as our board, as a leadership, that you can see yourself at REA, being a good ancestor here, participating well with each other here, and just grateful that you have decided to show up for this year's conference. I want to say a special thank you to Tenseg. They built the website from scratch. They built the schedule from scratch. They made all of this happen virtually. So can you take yourselves off mute and express out loud some gratitude for all this tech support? Please, out loud, claps. You can do it.
Great job. Hey.
Oh, Alex and Eric.
Go ahead and leave yourselves off mute. We got to thank our wonderful, wonderful staff. So we got Mary, Lakeisha, Joyce, who have put together a journal, this conference, membership stuff. So express yourself very loud. I mean, that was quiet. Be loud, please. Annoy your neighbors.
Great job. Yay.
Right.
I really hope you did annoy your neighbors, because then they come over and say, why were you yelling? And you can say, I was at a religious education conference, and they will look at you like you're crazy. So I'm just grateful for all of the staff support for making this possible. And my last gratitude before I hand it over to Ann Walker is to Ann for putting this together. For when this, we made a lot of decisions. This group, we invited a bunch of folks to come together to help us think and make art together, make a poem together to think through this annual theme all the way back in January 2021. The board had to wrestle with, in January, the rising cases in COVID. Do we do something in person? And we pivoted, and all of these plans that we have for in-person stuff really went up there, and Ann came and said, I have an idea. And I'm so grateful she brought this idea, this work, and this time together. So thank you, Ann, as our VP stepping in. And I'm going to hand over the mic to her to both introduce her guests and the practice. But thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. This conference wouldn't be the same without you. So thank you. And Ann Walker, step up the mic.
Hey, thanks, Patrick. Good evening, relatives everywhere, relatives worldwide. I'm Ann Walker. I'm the Vice President of the Religious Education Association, and I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I live here in the Muskogee Creek Nation in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I work at Phillips Theological Seminary. And for the past 4 months, myself and a group of Indigenous women scholars have gathered around a digital kitchen table in order to practice a method of knowledge generation and wisdom sharing with Indigenous kinship as its foundation. We were led by Dr. Kim Anderson, who is a Métis scholar. She's associate professor in the Department of Family Relations and Applied Nutrition at the University of Guelph, Ontario, Canada. Kim led our group to share stories, sip tea, explore what Indigenous feminism is, and how our practices of Indigenous feminism make their way into our scholarship and practice. The recording you will see today captures one of the sessions that we held together, one of the kitchen table sessions. And after you see this recording, all of the members of the kitchen table group will be here for conversation with you, for question and answer, that sort of thing. And I'd like to also invite you to join us for tomorrow evening's plenary, where we will hear in more detail from Dr. Anderson about this methodology, and we will learn from the entire group of presenters about the implications of this method for our work and lives. So I just want to kind of name before I jump into the video, everyone who was gathered around the kitchen table. As I mentioned, Dr. Kim Anderson was there, and she's here with us tonight. Reverend Patricia Bonilla is an ordained United Methodist minister with the United Methodist Church in the Northern Illinois Conference. And she's a doctoral student at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, and I think also a dissertation fellow with HTI. So wave if you would, Patricia. Also in our group was Yenny Delgado. Yenny is a PhD candidate in psychology of religion at the University of Lausanne. Yenny is a psychologist and a public theologian and founder and director of Publica and convener of Women Doing Theology in Abya Yala. And finally, Dr. Lisa Dellinger is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and a Louisville Institute postdoctoral fellow, visiting assistant professor of constructive theologies at Phillips Theological Seminary, and the George Tinker visiting professor at Iliff School of Theology. So you will see this full cohort in conversation over our digital kitchen table for about the next 40 minutes. And then we will see you back here in the live gathering for some conversation. So the next thing you will see is our recorded conversation.
So here we are on Wednesday. It's Wednesday, June 29th, right? Just after the summer solstice. And so what I thought we'd do today is just practice what we've been doing all these months. I can't remember, when did we start, Anne? We started in March?
We started in March. Yes.
Started in March. So we've already gone through one season and here we are. So I thought we would just do what we do at the kitchen table, practice, and see where it goes. And we'll try to keep it fairly short, like under 40 minutes, because I know it can be hard watching other people on a screen, especially after all this COVID time. And I'll just start out by just recapping a little bit on the idea of what we're doing, which comes from Anne approaching me based on some literature that she read that I talked about how I try to use kitchen table methodologies and kitchen table practices, in particular with my students and with my lab and the people I train and work with. And that is basically just coming to the table as humans first, coming to the meetings with ourselves fully and where we're at. So with my students in my lab meetings that we have, we usually cook and eat together. We always cook and eat, or at least before the pandemic we did. And then we do, we do smudging, and we usually have an eagle feather with us. And so we go around the circle and everybody talks first in the first round around the circle about where they're at personally. You're not allowed to talk about work. I'm so busy, I got 3 papers to write, and we can all do that, right? But it's like, no, talk about yourself first, personally, what's going on, what's on your mind, what's on your chest, your family, your pets, whatever it is, right? And then the second round, because it's my lab meeting, we usually talk about the work that everybody's doing, and we try to figure out how we can support each other. We have ideas with each other. We listen to each other's practice, and then we build knowledge that way, right? So anyway, and invited me to do this with this group in anticipation of the conference that people are now at least virtually. So that's what we're going to do. And so we're going to do our first round like we always do, just coming from where you're at. And then we will do the second one, talking about like just coming forward with their ideas about what this practice that we've been doing as it means as an Indigenous feminist practice. Like, how is it what we've been doing as an Indigenous feminist practice, and what does it mean where we're sitting right now as we kind of come to this, I guess, our last meeting since we've been meeting in March, which feels kind of sad too, right? But anyway, that's what we'll do. So I will say, like, I prepared myself for this meeting today because my spiritual practice comes from Korean Métis peoples. I use a pipe that I smoke, and so I'm in the midst of my own pipe ceremony here. So that's going on, and I have medicines out and stuff, and I also have my tea that Anne sent as part of the kitchen table methodologies, because tea is always important in part of these conversations. So I'll start, and then maybe I'll go in the order that I see people on my screen. Maybe we'll go to Patricia, and then Lisa, and then Anne. We'll go in that order. We do have another participant that's been with us who's not with us today, and so maybe we can find a way to have her contribute in the next presentation. And that's Yenny. So we're thinking about her. So where am I at? So this has been a terrible week for me. I mean, I spent all weekend crying because the first thing that happened on Friday, not the big thing that happened on Friday, but in my personal life, my beautiful dog Petey was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And I was just so heartbroken. I am heartbroken now, but believe me, I've spent all weekend crying about it and trying to figure out how to support him through his end of life. Like basically, how do I do palliative care with him and thank him for all he's done for me and for everybody else. And when I do my prayers, like when I did my prayer with my pipe today, you know, you go through all of creation, right? You start with from the ground up, and at some point you get to the four-leggeds. And all through this time of pandemic, when I've been doing my ceremonies, I've been thanking the four-leggeds and the furry ones for helping us through, because he really helped me through, you know, all the anxiety and depression during the pandemic. He's basically been like stuck beside me the whole time. And he's done a lot of work in his life to help out people who are isolated and lonely. He's done a lot of work as a dog that goes into hospices. He lived with my mother in the seniors home for a couple years, like all this work that they do. So I just want to give gratitude and acknowledge the non-human relations, in particular the four-leggeds and the domestic animals that help us with everything, right? They help us with love, unconditional love. They help us with healing. They help us to, I don't know, just to bring things back. I always say he's the purest thing I know, right? He's so pure and beautiful. And actually, when you do ceremonies with our Indigenous ceremonies, often you're not supposed to have dogs, because the understanding is dogs have their own ceremonies that they do, and we have ours, and we don't mix them up. Like we respect each other's protocols and spaces and places. So my partner just took him out for lunch. He loves to ride around the car, so we took him out. But he may come to the door, and I think I'll let him in today because I'm trying to be close to him during this time. So that was hard, and I'm still struggling with that. And then on Friday, I was so obsessed with that, I didn't see the news about Roe v. Wade until later. And that's, you know, kind of like, it's just sitting with me so heavily. And just all this worry and this time that we're in, you know, limping out of this pandemic that, you know, like all these folks are still getting COVID. And you know, I'll say, like I was mentioning earlier, like I live in Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen, even though as Indigenous people, we don't consider ourselves always, you know, citizens of the nation state, settler nation state. But I live in Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen. I've lived here all my life. But, you know, obviously we watch what's going on with US politics, because we're like what happens there moves here. And it's not only that, but globally. So I'm just feeling the weight of all of that, trying to figure out what to do. I'm going through my own grieving about my little furry one. So I'm in the micro grieving and struggle, and I'm really feeling the macro as well. So when I did my ceremony to start out for this, you know, time we're spending together today, I really concentrated on all of that. And I just want to say, starting out, that I was really looking forward to talking to you, not all just so I could dump all this stuff, but to acknowledge that we have communities that can come together and practice and honor and celebrate life. And how do we work together to make sure that we keep going, to make sure that that a lot of the injustices that, if you think about as Indigenous women that we've suffered, we can continue to be active in making those changes. So anyway, I really feel part of this circle today, and I'm grateful. And that's what I'm going to say for my opening. So thank you very much for listening. And with that, I'll pass it on to you, Patricia. maybe you can tell us where you are. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I have really been looking forward to being with this group. Right now I'm at the Hispanic Theological Initiative. I'm doing doctoral dissertation writing. And I'm feeling really, really heartbroken. I mean, on the one hand, I'm here and I feel very, very encouraged and very like motivated to do the work that I'm doing. But on the other hand, just like what's going on in the world. You know, Monday night, a trailer full of migrants was found in San Antonio. And the death toll is 53 bodies found of migrant workers trying to, you know, make a better life for themselves. Children were in this trailer as well. And this is, I mean, just a month ago in Uvalde, Texas, a school shooting where, you know, Latino children were killed. So I'm just, I don't know. I'm just so sad. I'm feeling very sad. And I know that the work that, you know, that I'm doing, and also the work that we do collaboratively, is so important and so urgent. But sometimes I feel very hopeless in how we can respond to these big, huge things that are happening. And so, you know, one of the things that I wrote about in this article for REA was about retrieving ancestral knowledge, was about you know, how we learn from the geographical locations where, you know, our families come from. And more people are having to migrate, are having to leave their places of origin, are being stripped of dignity and any kinds of means to make a living for themselves because of, you know, these global forces, right? Capitalist greed. And yet we afford such little attention, I think, to the struggles and the violence that all of this, you know, kind of, that all of this entails, that all this it's just, it's exacerbating for me. It's really, really, really sad. And so I don't know, I love being here in the space with you all. And I think that finding points of connection and also ways to support each other and ways that our scholarship can give some voice to this, to these issues. So I feel inspired, but at the same time feeling overwhelmed and hopeless at times. But I also feel the need to be in community in order to figure out, you know, what we can do to move forward. So that's where I'm at. That's where I am today.
Yeah.
And I pass it on to who was the next person, Kim?
To Lisa. Thanks for that, Patricia.
I have a head cold. Allergies are activated, so I'm not quite myself. Kim, I'm so sorry to hear about your dog. I've had 2 labs that were over 20 that I took care of at home until their last day, until their last breath. And it's a gift, and it's a terrible, terrible pain in your heart. But it's so wonderful to be able to give back the love and the joy that they've brought you. So I'll be thinking of you in the coming days. Patricia, you speak so eloquently about some really horrendous things that are they just keep happening on repeat. just the total disregard for women, the expendability of children's bodies. It breaks my heart too, but more often than not, I just walk around with rage all the time. Because it's so cyclical. It happens so often. Just the expendability, the senselessness of it all. And of course, we had elections in Oklahoma this week, local elections. And so, just sitting there watching all the campaign ads that just champion the wrong things. Just the blatant white supremacist, homophobic rhetoric that is employed as if it's some sort of value and not the absolute opposite of it. I feel weak physically, I feel weak emotionally, but I'm mad all the time, I think. I just want to protest, but I feel like I'm screaming in the wind. My time with you guys and being able to process this with you has been so helpful in allowing me to articulate my feelings about the world. And it helps me process what I want to say in my work. I have tried to retreat quite a bit from the media this week, in the last couple of weeks, because it's been so toxic. Of course, I couldn't ignore the Roe versus Wade atrocities that are willing to put women's rights at risk because we're worshiping a fetus as if it's a golden calf, and we're not valuing the agency and the very real danger to a woman, whether they're physically healthy or not. Relationships can be very unhealthy. And that child caught in the middle, that nobody's really thinking about. All of those things have been rattling in my head. And that being said, I've also taken time this past week to spend with my twin grandbabies, Olive and Arlo. We went swimming, and I was just able to pour a lot of attention and love on them. And to see her making decisions and giving direction to her dad and her grandfather, and just really wanting nothing to really disturb that sense of self and that sense of agency and pride that Olive has at the age of 2, and watching her brother share with her and see her as a partner in crime and in joy. I mean, I really worry about the world that they're inheriting and how senseless it all is to keep imposing those same kinds of restrictions when there's the capacity to have joy and abundance and wholeness. Yeah, I'm angry and I'm sad, but I'm grateful for those little moments with them and with you guys and with my husband, my partner in crime. So really, that's all I can say about that right now. So are we going to Anne now?
Oh gosh. I have been so looking forward to this as well. For all of the reasons that you all have stated, but I think two stand out for me. One is that it's really hard for me to develop my scholarship outside of community. Really hard. I cannot just read a book and sit at a desk and write something good. I need to be in community with loved ones and like-minded people. And I find that with you all. And every time we meet, I have some new energy for discovering something new and true. And that for me, it just doesn't happen sitting at a desk. And I have, in the last week, I've had COVID, and like all of you, have been really disturbed by the erosion of women's rights in the United States, which of course have been eroded for women of color for generations. And I want to name two experiences I had that I haven't been able to name publicly yet, that kind of pushed me in the direction of the sort of disembodiedness that I think this movement against women is intending. And one is when I was just finally getting some energy back after having, being down for 4 days with COVID, I was walking around my house cleaning up because it was a mess. And I was walking actually this way in my kitchen, which is away from my television. And I turned around and I saw the news flash up that the Supreme Court had overturned Roe versus Wade. And I didn't stop and turn around and looked. I just walked away, walked outside and threw some trash away. It was like I could not face that as a real thing. Roe versus Wade has been the rule for women in our country since 2 years before my birth. I was the recipient of a healthy and legal abortion in the United States in the state of Oklahoma when I was a kid-ish. And this it's like an out-of-body experience or a disembodied experience, like not knowing how to embody this reality now. My family went to lunch the other day with another family, and we were talking about this, and I was saying, I don't really feel, I'm not hanging a flag outside my house this year for July 4th. And I'm not feeling very patriotic at all, or like I have very much independence at all. And the man that was with us, our family friend, said, well, I have some opinions about that. And I very quickly said, I don't really want to hear any man's opinions about any of this right now. And I kept eating my scrambled eggs. And ever since then, I have felt like I should apologize to him for having been so rude. And every time I have felt that impulse to send him a text or say something, I have stopped myself, because our embodiment matters. The fact that we're having this conversation today in our bodies and about our bodies is so essential. I also have encountered some conversation lately among white feminists about the possibility of tribal lands in the US being sort of an accessible space for women to access abortion. I find that really frustrating to the extent that all of the economic and environmental issues that Indigenous women face in United States on tribal lands and off tribal lands are completely disregarded in this kind of conversation about providing white women space for abortion. So I'm thinking a lot about reproductive justice and health justice as religious leadership issues, about the role, about this conversation in spaces like the Religious Education Association and in my own theological scholarship. And I just wanted to share with you real briefly, one of the places I've been finding solace on social media, which should come to no surprise as anyone who lives in the 21st century. And there's a religious leader named Gail Song Bantam out of Washington State, who named these as religious issues really well for me. She said the complexity, I know I have to find where I wrote down what she said. She said these sort of reproductive rights issues are indeed religious issues and are issues that face and should face every religious leader in every faith community. And we need to be asking ourselves, she says, which bodies have never been subject to communally discerned positions, amendments, and legislation. So there are women's bodies have been, and arguably white women's bodies have been constantly subject to communally discerned positions, amendments, and legislations. But which women's bodies have not been considered when we think about not only reproductive justice, but environmental justice, economic justice, and the intersection of the three? She said our votes make room or restrict access. And so how are we having conversations in our spaces of religious and faith formation to talk about the bodies that we don't usually talk about and the support of those bodies? And how do our faith communities stand against oppression at all levels in intersectional ways, and not simply and take into account the well-being of our communities and not just our kind of individual rights, right? In this sort of matrix of domination that we live in a particular way in this time. So like you all, I'm sad. I'm really kind of living in the midst of embodiedness and disembodiedness and trying to find myself within that. I just don't want to sit at a desk and work. I made lemon bread this morning because I wanted to do something with my hands that would feed myself and my community. I'm so happy to see your faces and thinking about Yenny and thinking about our four-legged friends as well. And just loving each of you.
Thank you, Anne. So that's how we're feeling. That's where we're at today, right? And I just feel the fullness of all of that, and I just want to thank you for that, all of you, and for listening to me. So I think maybe what we can do is just, again, let's just go around and just, it doesn't have to be focused or in response to anything in particular, but we could maybe just, or if you want to respond to each other, I think we'll go around the circle. The thing about using the circle is, everybody gets a chance to talk without, and everybody gets a chance to just listen and ponder. And then after we do that, maybe we have some time, we can pitch in with more dialogue. But yeah, just the question of like what we've done together, and everybody's expressed gratitude for that. How is this an Indigenous feminist practice that we're doing? I mean, maybe all those things are obvious by now, just listening to the first round, but yeah, what does this mean in terms of Indigenous feminism? How does that fit in? And when I think about it, and what I was thinking about this morning a lot was the granny spirit, right? So with the practice that I do, there's actually a grandmother spirit that looks after all kinship. She's also in charge of all the laws that have to do with relationality. And so I often pray to her, talk to her about what's going on, and thank her for holding certain things in place. And, we were talking earlier about the role of social justice, I guess, for lack of a better word, in the REA or elsewhere. And, I'm not a Christian, so I don't practice in that way, but I think about, well, what would Jesus do? And now I think about more often, what would Granny Spirit do? And what does Granny Spirit do all along? How does she guide us? And at one point I shared a piece that I wrote about Indigenous feminism, in which I tried to sort of like map it out, like just a survey of where did it come from? What is it? What do people use it for? And so on. And I started it out with this story of this woman in my teacher Maria Campbell's community, named this woman that she called Flora, not her real name, and how she resisted, how she was so strong in terms of the patriarchy that they were trying to impose, how she supported women, children, and also men who came to her, how she broke lots of rules, and she just kept going, right? Even after the priest beat her with a horsewhip out of the church because she wasn't complying to what he wanted to happen in that community. And so I'm kind of just sitting with that grandmother spirit today and acknowledging and recognizing that as Indigenous peoples, we don't come from patriarchal traditions. We don't come from systems of patriarchy. And we had systems in which there was balance and equity and also a reverence for life. And of course, honoring women's lives and the feminine spirit, and Granny kind of looked after those things, right? So I think about Granny spirit today, and I guess that's what I'll just start with, and try to put that out as a place of love and resistance. And that's, I think, what we have created in the little time we've had to spend together on Zoom, right? So that's my first thought. I'll pass it to you now, Patricia. Anything you want to say?
Thank you, Kim. I really enjoyed reading your piece. Thank you for sharing it with the group. I learned a lot. And I think what I appreciated about what you were doing in that article or chapter was like first giving space to the diversity of Indigenous feminisms that often contradict each other, that that may connect at some points. I think that is true as well of Latina intercultural feminisms, the various other feminisms that are part of Latinoa, Latinx spaces. And the same is true of like other, women of color feminist spaces. And what I appreciate about this group is that, from a pedagogical perspective, it's like coming to a space like this with our particular standpoints and being open to hear each other and to learn from each other and to engage in dialogue. I think that's kind of like the first step of creating spaces where change, transformation happens, but also where we can genuinely like collaborate, even though we don't necessarily agree on everything, but there are points that affect our embodied, selves, our embodied lives, and that that can also help us serve the communities that we come from in better ways or in different ways. So I really appreciate that about the space, and also about the mapping that you did. I also find like the piece that you shared, Anne, about performance and how there's only particular, let's say, theologies or theories that make it to the mainstream, and that is what gets highlighted and that's what gets projected, and all the others fall away and get erased, right? And then when we talk about Indigenous feminisms, there's a particular brand of Indigenous feminism that is okay to disseminate. Same with Latina feminisms. There's one particular kind that is safe or whatever to share in other spaces. So I just find that I find it troublesome, and I find it a challenge for us. Like, how can we highlight the various feminisms that also that also inform our scholarship and inform the work that we do. Like I can say, like I often I draw from various like like, feminist expressions, and some more than others in particular spaces. And I think that's okay, but I think it's hard to explain outside of the space, outside of, a space like this. Like, what does that look like? Are we performing in any particular way? Yeah, that's what I've been thinking about with, the readings that you all shared. And I really appreciate that. So thank you, Kim.
Thank you. And maybe we can put a link to some of these things so people can get in on the dialogue that way, right? And other things. See, Anne nodding. Okay, go ahead, Lisa. Anything you want to say?
We've talked about performativity before and recognition, and the guild, whatever guild you're a part of, has their own set of recognizable indicators of scholarship or of knowledge. I find the truly important stuff happens in the cracks between those things. And I think as a person who considers themselves more of an introvert, community is kind of a hard, taxing thing. I mean, I just taught a week-long intensive, that was like 6 to 8 hours a day for 5 days. And after that, I just wanted to lapse into a coma for another few days. But I mean, it's hard, but it's also important for me to do that, because not only do I get affirmation for what my beliefs are, I also get challenged. And it causes me to have to look at my own boundaries and articulate what rattles around in my head in a way that's coherent for somebody not from my perspective. The classroom is not always a safe space, not for us, and definitely not always for our students. Knowledge exchange is a power exchange, and there's always kind of bruising that happens around that, I think. But this particular group, I feel, because we have some of those points in common where we parallel, maybe not exactly intersect, but parallel experiences where I can recognize myself in your story, and hopefully you can recognize yourself in mine. It opens up those cracks to become spaces where I can actually breathe. And I don't have to worry about someone suddenly punching me in the gut when I'm trying to take a breath. Because there is a performance level of what happens when I enter into a classroom as an embodied Indigenous woman. A lot of assumptions are made about me. A lot of assumptions are made by me based on my experiences from having to walk into those rooms. And that sense of being authentically oneself, whatever authentic means, can be burdensome when you're trying to lead a course, or when you're trying to be in any position of leadership where you're interacting with people who maybe don't have the same kinds of experiences or can relate to your embodiment. And you talked about the need to apologize. I'm glad you didn't. I'm really glad you didn't. Because I can guarantee you whatever he was going to say, he would never apologize for. That's been my experience when somebody says they have thoughts on something. It's not that they really want to have a dialogue. It's that they want me to hear what they have to say and then, be meek about it. And that's not who I am. I also think you're fighting social conditioning, that women have to appease the male in the room. And that's not healthy. That's not a relational position to have. It's not being a good neighbor or a good relative, to try and shut down somebody's honest feelings in the moment. And we all make mistakes and we all say things that step on each other's toes. I'm not saying, this is a horrible person. I'm saying you had every right to say what you wanted to say and not have to hear something else, and it, honestly, when I'm in my own head like that, I find out later, usually the person generally forgets about it a lot sooner than I do. So no harm, no foul, right? Enjoy your eggs. So that's what I'm grateful for. These spaces where I can breathe, where I can say stuff and live into my own skin and not have to apologize for it. As long as I'm being respectful.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, go ahead, Anne.
I'm thinking about the truth of Indigenous feminism in this particular space. And the truth is, we're not all the same. We're not all from, we don't have the same national origins, right? We don't share languages. We have debated about whether motherhood is an essential component of an Indigenous feminist way of being, or whether, or what other frameworks, are authentically Indigenous feminists. We bring particular theologies and anti-theologies. And so if there's anything that's been true about my scholarly work for my entire professional journey, it's that messiness has been probably the truest thing. That that our sort of colonial scholarly framework wants to constantly authenticate, right? And find the one kind of stream of discourse that we can all generate conversation around, and like push the messiness aside so that we can analyze this one particular thing. But I've always found myself drawn to the messiness, and as you named earlier, Lisa, like the cracks and things, the interstices, the places where ideas come together and get kind of blown out of the water because things are messy. And where was I going with that? I don't even know. I appreciate, Kim, that the article that you wrote about Indigenous feminisms presented that messiness and allowed me to wrestle with that messiness and my location within that messiness. And I'm thinking also then, back to the conversations around reproductive justice and the intersectional nature of reproductive justice for women of color. and how reproductive justice is also connected to environmental justice and economic justice. And then I'm thinking about the fact that Pride happened here in Oklahoma last weekend. Gay Pride happened, was celebrated right openly. And I'm thinking about trans men who become pregnant because of their own, on their own accord, or because of sexual violence, and trans women who need access to dependable and affordable health care, and like how all these issues, unnamed issues, intersect around this whole kind of conversation around Roe, and what this means for religious leaders. And if my mindset stays in the conversation about individual rights, a woman's individual right to an abortion, and if I stay isolated at my desk and don't have conversation with you all, right? I have the tendency towards self-isolation and sort of an introverted way also, Lisa, which I think keeps me safe, but also means that I'm not kind of engaging with the full complexity of truth, right? I have to force myself into these kind of conversations where the messiness is present. And those are the spaces I love, right? Those are the spaces where I can find new generative insights for my own scholarship and teaching, and thinking about how to lead field education in the next year with students who are becoming pastoral leaders in their congregations, and should think about things like women's reproductive justice, everyone's reproductive justice. So I think for me, more than anything, Indigenous feminism means resisting the impulse to always having to dance with the colonial entity, right? That is always there. Oh, there, you guys can come in. There, kids are walking in the door. Hi, boys. Hi. There's always this dance with the colonial entity, and there is not such a thing as you guys can eat outside or you can eat in there. There may always be this dance with the colonial entity, and I don't know that there is anything, because of that, there isn't any sort of true pure indigeneity anymore, or any true pure Indigenous feminism. But I think for me, the fact that we are able to gather here and kind of wrestle with these realities, wrestle with our embodied lives and what this means, what the implications are for faith communities and religious leadership, allows me to wrestle with the messiness in a way that allows truth to illuminate, even though it's messy, and however, quote unquote, inauthentic it might be. Authentic or inauthentic, whatever the hell that means.
Thanks, Anne. I feel like we're just getting started, right? And especially, wrestling with the very heavy issues of the week, of where we're at in the world, that we could have some really messy dialogues around this. So I appreciate you putting that out there, the value of it, right? May that continue. So I'm mindful that probably, how many minutes have we been going here? At least 40, right? I think. So I'm mindful that our audience that's going to listen to this recorded message might find that enough to chew on. But I'll open it up right now. Is there anything anybody wants to say in terms of a burning response? And if not, maybe we can just go around the circle one last time for a very quick, closing, because when you open a circle, it's always good to close it too. So go ahead, Anne, did you have something you wanted to say or add?
I think I just had a final thought, and that is, what is the implications for this kind of space that we're demonstrating and embodying here for the REA as a scholarly guild? And why did we do this in the first place in order to show to the REA? And I think if there's anything I want and hope for the REA, it's that our gatherings and our discourse are more open to playing with the mess.
Yeah.
And engaging one another, finding points of consonance and where we can interreference in healthy ways, but also engaging with our difference, rather than utilizing the discursive space to highlight an individual and dissect a singular topic.
Mhm.
Right? That has been the pattern of scholarship for leading up that our ancestors had to wrestle with. Right? So what would it mean for us to utilize the wisdom of this Indigenous feminist space and all other spaces that are willing to engage with embodied messiness in order to discern new truths? So that's my cat meowing in the background. That's Luna.
And the four-legged furry ones and kids and food and all that stuff is such an important part of what we're doing here, right? Creating that space. So I'm really glad that we got to have a bit of that. And the banana bread. You can eat a piece for me. Okay, so let's finish up just with a final round to close, even a word or two about where you're sitting now going forward. And this presentation, of course, will be followed by a more formal presentation tomorrow night, for those of you that are watching this now, in which we'll map out a little bit more our thinking around Indigenous feminisms and kitchen table methodologies. So Patricia, do you want to say a word or two just to finish?
Yeah. So we were talking in this conference, we had book presentations, and we talked about ethnography, right? And how there's a particular way of doing ethnography, right? But in my scholarship, I'm interested in blurring the lines of what is considered research and what is considered ethnography, but also what are the boundaries, because I'm actually doing research of a community that I am very much a part of, where I was formed, where I, kind of have discerned my vocation, have grown as a leader, and all this. And so very much committed to the work of this organization, but also looking at how reflecting on it is research, is scholarship. And so one of the comments of the presentations was, it's only in recent years that more Latinos are doing ethnographic work. And some of the pushback was from women, is that women have been doing this kind of research, right? We've been blurring the lines for a long time. But unfortunately, the research has been interpreted as narrative, as subjective, even autobiography, right? And so how do we disrupt this idea of research, scholarship, and embodied lives, embodied practices, spiritualities, commitments, all of this? I don't think that there's any defined lines. And I think that we need to be more honest about, as researchers and as scholars, the commitments and the communities that shape us, and why we do the work that we do, without parsing that out, right? So that's why I love this space and what we're doing here. That's one of the many reasons I'm really enjoying this collaboration. So thank you all.
Right on, thank you. Go ahead, Lisa.
I'm mindful of time, but all this conversation has got me thinking about what it was that drove me to scholarship in the beginning, what was the first impetus to push me into theology and specifically looking at Indigenous women's bodies and narratives of sin in the Western imposition of sin on Indigenous women's bodies as a mechanism of power, control, biopower. And it goes back to me being a 7-year-old girl who was watching a newscast and seeing an account of an Indigenous woman being brutally murdered and them never solving the crime. And not only her, but again, at the age of about 12 and again around the age of 17, that same, they suspect killer killing 2 other women. With no, to this day, it's a cold case. And these were Indigenous women living on the margins, but in my child's mind and in my adult mind still, they're blood of my blood and flesh of my flesh. And so what happens to these bodies matter. And I think that's what embodiment means to me in my scholarship. It's recognizing the fragility and the vulnerability that we all bring to our scholarship. It's the reflection we do on those things that define who we are. I call that moment when I heard about this woman's murder, when I realized I had a killable self. That my mother, who looked like these women, had a killable self. And I couldn't ignore the embodied nature of that, the connection. So I think that's part of the reason why I love coming to this particular group, is because it's filled with life, but we all have our own narratives that brought us to this place where we recognize our own vulnerability and the precariousness of the lives that we do live and that we live in community. So that's what I think about when I think about the messiness driving scholarship.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, go ahead, Anne.
So as we've mentioned today in this group over, since March, we've shared a lot of stories, our own stories and struggles. We've talked a lot about, what Indigenous feminism is, what the markers of that are. We've wrestled around with colonization and Christianity and talked about performance, right? And the element of performing indigeneity in our scholarly lives, in our professional lives, in our personal lives. And I think now at the close of this, what I'm realizing is more true than anything to me is that none of you all have asked me to perform in any particular way. No one here has forced me to, as Lisa says, put on red face, right? No, never have I felt I needed to show up here dressed up in a certain way, saying particular things in order that you would know that I'm an Indigenous woman. I feel like I have to do that in the Theological Academy all the time. Like that's the desired performance, is for me to show up with beaded earrings and with some, to be the person that recognizes the 4 directions and shit like that. And that's what I see when annual meetings get together, scholarly meetings get together and want Indigenous people to come and do, perform ceremony for them. They want us to have our powwow shawls. They want us to bring our children and oogle over them, and they want us to play drums. What I get from you all is that you look at me, you hear me, and you go, oh, Indigenous woman. Look, my Indigenous child just walked past me. My Indigenous husband just walked out the door. You know what? These are our daily interactions. This is our daily life. It's not a performance. It is about our embodied realities. It's about what I'm going to feed my child when I hang up from here, and how I'm going to talk to him about being a man in a post Roe versus Wade world. So I am so grateful for the complex conversations that we've had, and especially for the fact that you all invite me in some unnamed way and compel me to show up in my authenticity and free from performance.
There's so many rich discussions around performance, which we can carry on with. So I'll just finish with one word. The word that comes to me is leadership. I'm gonna finish with that one in all the senses, right? So I think we're gonna stop the recording, and then we will go to a live Q&A, which will happen sometime next week. So thank you, everybody. We will look forward to discussions with all this messiness. Bye. See you soon.
Whew, okay, so you heard a lot. So just in case anybody dropped in while the kitchen table dialogue was playing and you're not sure exactly what you walked into, this was a recorded demonstration of a kitchen table space led for us by Kim Anderson from University of Guelph, our digital auntie for this space, which is designed to sort of show you in some ways how at least in an Indigenous women's space, a kitchen table space can go. And so tomorrow at the plenary, you'll hear more, especially from Kim, about the methodology in particular, and then some of the reactions of those of us who were present during those conversations over the last 4 months about the creation of this space. And I should mention, Yenny Delgado was part of our kitchen table gatherings for the past 4 months and was sick when we recorded last week, but Yenny is here today and will be present tomorrow as part of the presentation. And also Patricia Bonilla, who you saw on the recording today, pastors a church very close to Highland Park, Illinois, and they are having a vigil tonight. And so, of course, our prayers are with Patricia and her community as they make sense of what's happened and they begin to heal. And I believe Patricia will be back tomorrow as well. So at this point, I think we can simply open up the conversation for dialogue, questions, conversation. And we still have how much time, Patrick?
Say half an hour, 45 minutes, yeah, before the next session.
And if you have questions or comments, you're welcome to, name the person that you'd like to converse with. Everyone is here except Patricia tonight.
I can start us off. I'd like to first thank you all for letting us into this space and allowing us to see these honest conversations and vulnerability. Greatly appreciated and am moved by it. And I'm wondering if there was any hesitancy to let us into this space, right? Because there is also a need for some sort of closeness in order to be as vulnerable as you were. was there a conversation of not necessarily pros and cons, but did the conversation feel different because you knew it was being recorded and would be shared? I'm just wondering how the fact that it's not a closed space, if that changed the conversation at all, and was there any hesitancy? This is not directed to anyone in particular, so any of you just kind of chime in.
I'll start, but then, I think we all have things to say about this. And I'll just say that did have a lot to do with some of the conversations we had around performance and, to what extent were we expected to perform in a certain way as Indigenous women, as Anne alluded to in her some of her closing comments at the end there. And so I think part of the vulnerability and the rawness was being able to just go from where we're at and not feel like we had to perform in a certain way, while at the same time maybe protecting certain parts of ourselves that we didn't want to open up. But I like, for the conversation that we recorded last week, of course, you saw when I started out, it's about my dog, and it's also, I was thinking it was my dog and Roe v. Wade. That's where I was at. That's right raw where I was at, right? And I thought, well, I don't know if I should be talking about this at a religious conference. And actually, before the conversation started, because we actually had a little okay, are we ready to go? And I was like, okay, this is where I'm at. So I don't know if we want to go there, if we want to go for it or not. But we did, because that's where we were at. So, and with the encouragement of Anne to be where we were and to be raw with it. So maybe that's part of trying to bump ourselves out of performance in a certain way, because it was what you saw, of course, was very real, right? End of thought from me.
I mean, I'll just say some of the things that at least I shared during that particular kitchen table conversation are elements of my story and my truth that I think should make their way into my scholarship. And I felt really comfortable sharing them with the group. And I think all of my sisters around the kitchen table can verify that, like, cussing is kind of a normal thing for me. But when this was played just now, I turned off my video, and every time something really vulnerable came up or I dropped a cuss bomb, I just kind of shrunk and started texting my people. I mean, we talked a lot about performance in these sessions, and there's a certain way in which you're still seeing performance because we're telling you things that we want you to know, knowing that you're going to see and hear them. And also we're in this kind of intimate space that we've built together where we know one another. So it's hard to know if the conversation would have gone differently if we had, it would be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how our conversations together evolve after this, because all of our conversation leading up to this point has been about getting here, right? And also very much about our everyday. So any other thoughts from the group?
Honestly, we talked obviously a lot about performance and expectation and, how to be. But for myself, I can only speak for myself. When we came to this, I just decided that, flaws and all, I need to bring myself to the table. And so that's what I chose to do. Did I think about all your faces looking at me? Not really. I do feel a certain sense of vulnerability right now, but I'm not sorry that I shared anything that I did. That's how I was one day with a certain group of people. And, you know, for the most part, I really didn't think too hard about what I was saying. I just tried to be in the moment. So for better or worse, that's what it is.
Yeah, I see a hand from Cheryl.
Yes, thank you. I have 3 questions or comments, and I'll keep them short, or else I'll speak forever. So thank you for allowing us to share the space that you had. The first thing that struck me is that what you're doing is very dangerous. And I say it's very dangerous in a complimentary way, because I've just been in the process of writing the conclusion to my dissertation, where I talk about if the church continues to divorce itself from speaking about the body, it will not really have an effect on the contemporary world in the future, because we are embodied people. And so the danger, I think, is that if we continue to speak this way, the positive danger is that we will get in touch with our bodies and how we treat one another's bodies and what people do to our bodies. And for those who harm our bodies, they would prefer that we divorce ourselves from our bodies, and that we not protest when they hurt our bodies. And so I think that if we do focus in this way, whether as a guild or as a global church, and I'm using that term very loosely, that there is a possibility to change the world. The second comment is where to start. Do you think about that in your gatherings, your Indigenous women's tables, about how or where do you start inviting other people in to get in touch with their bodies and to get in touch with where God meets them in their bodies and to get in touch with others? And then my third comment or question is, I just attended a conference for pluralistic counseling and psychotherapy that came out of Scotland. And the thing that struck me with the gathering they were all strangers to me, but I was drawn to it for my own continuing education as a therapist. And the thing that struck me was that the way they spoke to one another was the way that you spoke to one another this afternoon, or that you've showed us. And that was a breath of fresh air, because as therapists speaking to one another about what they were doing and how they were struggling and the questions that they had that couldn't be resolved and the problems that they had in doing something, again, there's power in that acknowledgement. So I was really grateful for that. And yeah, I think inviting other people into that, I think people will be drawn into that. And to Annie's question to you, did you think about, how we would react? I just wonder if, as you become more connected with your bodies and meeting one another, if you stop wondering about how people react, and let them react where they are. That's all that I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I really appreciate your comments and encouragement and probes. I mean, there becomes a point where you just go come what, where you just say, come what may. You know, this is a truth. This is a set of truths in community. You know, take it or leave it. I don't quite, yes, it's dangerous. And I don't know that there's anything to do anymore except jump. And I say that saying, like, I've been a member of the REA for like 20 years and really silent a lot. And wrote for many years, like somebody wanted me to write, right? Like the colonial entity wanted me to write in order to get noticed. And I just don't have room for that anymore. So danger, I mean, it's just come what may at this point. And yeah. Any other comments or questions before we break for today?
Love to, well, one, just thank you for sharing the space and letting us sit with you. Lisa, you said something that stuck with, I mean, I've just, the methodology, the way you do this, it reminds me of home. It's just it was such a breath of fresh air. But you said something tied to this last question. You said the killable self. I'm gonna try not to cry. That's the question. So it said something about the killable self and this body, the danger that it is. And I think about my home body. I think about my kids who have killable selves because they see it in the news. They see it in the lives, that the conversations I'm having with my kids about what their bodies represent as young kids of color, with multiple ancestry, Indigenous, Chicano, that all these things, and bringing that to themselves and having a space to have that conversation. And for us as a guild, thinking through these questions, even to have the space to know that my daughter was crying about this yesterday, hearing the news about someone dying and thinking about it being her, and not having the space in scholarly settings to have this conversation. How do you I'm curious as to how you navigate that both. And the danger is not just a sort of danger out there. It is the killable self showing up in a space that is not safe, which is the academic space, which is our profession, how we make our money. So I'm curious how y'all balance those two things, the killable self with this space that's unsafe and yet is the space that, at least as I see it, the way that I track and create beauty for my kids and make sure my people aren't erased or eradicated from the record.
I really don't know how to answer that. I just know that it was a deep part of my formation. And that's when, as I got older, I started looking at the narratives that normalize death and poverty around specific bodies. And when I raised my children, you know, I was very honest with them that we weren't supposed to be here. I mean, there are boxes of bodies in the Smithsonian. You know, there are portraits made that are similar to portraiture done of extinct animals. There was a plan for us not to be here. Genocide is real. I think at some point, I just decided in my scholarship, I had to point out that what we say or what we think isn't just isolated somewhere in space. I don't write particularly about the women whose deaths kind of shaped my own experience. mainly because I don't want to make a spectacle out of that. But I can't completely disavow their impact on me and in what I do to try and keep their memory sacred in some way that society did not or has not. And I think knowing that I have a killable self, and at my age and at this point in my life, I've decided that if you're going to kill my body, then I will go out on my own terms with my own voice and with as much agency as I can manage at this point. I could make a living doing anything. I have a support system. I'm lucky that way. But as long as I'm able to use this space the way that I have and the way that I plan to in the future, I'm going to continue doing that. Because it's just heartbreaking for me to think that there are other 7-year-olds still in this world learning that they're marked for death. That's horrific. And I think that's something that we as religious educators, as human beings, as embodied selves, should be a huge part of our scholarship and our consciousness as we go into these spaces. And if it's not, that's just the deepest tragedy there can be for me. So.
I'm going to say we probably have time for one more question or comment. Okay. I'm sure you all have hungry bellies or families who need your attention. And we have a 7 o'clock session, or at least 7 Central, coming up. Anything else we need to know before we break for the day, Patrick?
No, just make sure to, there's the feedback form that Alex just put in the thing. Please go to the next session, Queering Ancestors. It's going to be a great session they've been working on for a while for those who are in that number. So you can go to that. It's on the schedule. And just deep gratitude. If you can express your gratitude in the chat for this space, for this conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Anne, Lisa, Kim, Yenny, Patricia, who's not here. Just deep, deep gratitude.